Okay, what do we have here? Looks like it might be cottonwood or something like that. And when we harvested it, it didn't have any bark on it. We couldn't tell what kind of wood it is. But it's pretty good size. We've got something like 16 inches on the short side and about 20 inches on the long side. And this way we've got about 16 inches. So what I've decided to make out of it is two bowl-shaped carvings. But first we'll turn it on the lathe, round, and we'll divide it just about like that, where we cut through the center of the pith across the diameter. So that means we'll have a large, deep bowl-like shape, and we'll have a shallow one. The reason we do that is if we do it any other way, the pith would be not in the middle of the bowl, which is a bad thing. Usually it's not balanced. So what we're going to do is take a chainsaw and cut it this way, all the way, trying to stay in the pith, all the way down the bowl that way. And then when we get to that point, we'll start the video again. Alright, what I've done here, as you can see in the floor, I've cut off one side of this and it's fallen in the floor. And over here is, I made another cut. I cut a swath down through the middle which cut out the pith. The pith is where most cracks in a bowl will propagate from. And so we get rid of it. Now sometimes you can use it. I made platters out of them. They really look pretty if you can, but you don't want to run your bowl with it. So now that I've got one side cut off, I need to cut this other one off. Okay, we've got our wood cut to slabbed out, and now we need to cut the shape of the bowl. And the bowl cavity will be on this side, and the bowl base will be underneath here. Circle out of this. In order to help do that, I have a set of circles that I made. These are the circles, and it's nifty to have these because you can easily lay out what you need on the bowl. I already know that it's going to take a 13-inch circle. That's 14, and here's 13, and so we center that in the piece, and we consider any cracks that are coming in, and we move it in order to make sure that there's as few cracks as possible in the perimeter of the bowl. Then we mark it out. Like so. And remember to mark the center. Alright, there we have the outline of the bowl that we're going to cut. Now, in order to get this where you don't have to turn off all the big corners and so forth, which is laborious, and we'll find that out as we get over on the lathe, we have to cut the corners off and the extended length here at the center. So I'll show you what I mean by that. Now, I generally tilt the chainsaw blade inward because that's the shape of the bowl. So I'll mark Now, generally I'd go all the way through and knock that corner off, but save time on the film, we will just mark it and do the same thing here. Now, when we're done cutting those corners, we'll want to cut this tip off. And then we do that on both ends, and then we'll have a part, a chunk of wood, like I'm going to show you next. Okay, now last time I showed you how to cut out the different faces on the piece of wood, and this is what it looks like when you're done. It's almost in a bowl shape, and it's very rough cut. So now we need to consider how we're going to mount it on the lathe, and there's a lot of ways. Every lathe generally comes with these two mounting methods. One is for the drive. This is the drive center. It's called a spur center, and this is what they call a live center, which is goes in the tailstock. This would go in like this, and the other center on the other side would be where the tailstock mounts to the piece of wood. But this is too small to support the cutting that we'll need to do on it, so we're going to have a better method, and this is primarily for spindle work, but I've used it for small bowls. Now, this is a mounting plate or a face plate that also usually comes with a lathe, and it's made to mount on large flat surfaces. I've even mounted these on not so flat surfaces if we use long screws, and I have had to use these before. There's other situations where you're mounting a very small bowl blank, and you don't want the screws to go all the way through, so you use something like this, and these are sheet metal screws. Don't ever use a drywall screw. They're real hard and they snap pretty quick, and if you've ever run into one of those as you're trying to turn the bowl, you won't do it again. Okay. And all the screws I have here are sheet metal screws, and these are the ones I'm going to use to mount this face plate or mounting plate on this chunk of wood. Now, if you remember, can you see the dot here? That is the center of this circle. And you remember we made it with this little jig, and that's the center. And I can eyeball that and bring it down and get it pretty close to center. This point, most things are pretty close, and they're not exactly. Now some people make a little wooden peg that fits down in here with a nail that protrudes out and goes into the center. If you want to do it that way, that's good. Alright, now we need to run the screws in. But there's one other situation. Sometimes your bowl blank is just not that flat, and you need to put spacers under one corner or another. And also a reason for spacers is that your center at the bottom is not where you want it. And in other words, it hadn't been cut off exactly to where the center that you're looking for is proper on the bottom. So when you get it on the lathe, you'll find out whether you got it correctly mounted or correctly cut. Alright, now that we've got this centered, we'll go ahead and run the screws in. Now, that's enough screws to hold that. One other thing I wanted to mention is the other methods of mounting on the lathe. I'll just show you what I've got here. This is a scroll chuck, 4-jaw scroll chuck, and you'll notice the screws inside. We can remove these jaws and put different sized jaws on it. Here's a set of jaws. It's called stair-step jaws. This one is a smaller set of jaws for smaller work. This is generally used for inside work, to clamp inside say a hole, like in a pipe-like structure, so it fits inside and expands outward. All of these will work in the expansion mode. And then this one is kind of a faceplate mounting method, where you have little rubber bumpers that go into these holes and fit a bowl on their face toward it. It's not a very sturdy holding method, but it allows you to clean up the bottom of a bowl and so forth. And we'll talk about these when we get on the lathe, and there's a certain place in which we start using the scroll chuck. Okay, we're at the lathe now, and if you remember, we mounted the faceplate to it, and this is our interface to the lathe. And now I'm ready to mount the bowl blank to the lathe. And this is the spindle, and I need to lock the spindle, and this little gizmo locks the spindle. And then I just screw it into the spindle and spin it up until it's tight. Well, our tool rest is in the way. I can't tighten it all the way up. So I'm going to have to remove it and move the tool rest. Move the tool rest out of the way. Now back on we go. And we bring it up tight. Remove the locking mechanism. Now it's mounted to the lathe, and we can start rotating it. It's ready to turn. But there's one other item that we need to be aware of, and that is you always want to be as safe as you can be with these things. And so I want to bring up the tailstock and put the live center at this end to stabilize this in case we get a catch or something that might want to rip it off the lathe. And with this, it makes it quite safe. It's called a live center because the point rotates, and it is put into the lathe via a tapered spindle, and we just slap it in there, and now it's ready to go. Now I got to slide this up and stab it into the wood, but I want it to be rotating while I do that, so I get the perfect center. Now lock it in place, run it in good and tight. Now it's ready to just a minute. I didn't lock my headstock down. I was hollowing previously, so I got to lock it down. It was the tailstock was turning too easy. Now she's tightening up. Now it's ready to turn, and we can turn up the speed of the lathe depending on the lathe and the piece of wood you're turning. It can be out of balance, and it'll start vibrating. It's going pretty good. It's a pretty well balanced piece of wood. And I feel some vibration there, so I can crank it down. And it's going 420, 410, 420 RPM. Now we're going to delay the turning till another video, and we'll not be taking up how to turn and what tools to use and that sort of thing. We'll just take the process of turning it. We turn the outside, and then we turn the inside, how we mount it, and all of that business. Okay, until next time, have a good day.